So Gary, that was incredible and exciting. Learned a ton. I'm maybe most excited about the fact that you can now use Unqork to get married. You've now signed up millions of Jewish and Indian mothers worldwide who can apparently, as I understand it, now go on Unqork and click doctor, lawyer, maybe engineer if I want. And then presumably that goes right into a workflow of, well, here's when I want the wedding and the caterer and all of that. So that's actually incredibly impressive. So let me introduce this incredible panel, and I have to thank Gary and the Unqork folks for assembling this terrific group, which is going to make my job really easy. So let me just start. On my left is Luke Flemmer. Luke is a real technology pioneer. Luke was early in the days of machine vision, natural language processing, and was with an organization, was the co-founder and CEO of Lab 49, which I'm sure some of you know about. Really early innovators in applying design thinking and agile to financial services, did incredibly innovative things. And Luke is now at Goldman Sachs at GSAM, and he is leading the digital strategy for alternatives. So Luke, welcome to the panel. Next to him is David Chubak. David is a fixer and a business transformation expert. There is no problem that David can't solve. There's no business that he can't turn around, and no team that he can't take to greater heights. He was at Citi for 10 years, fixing many of their businesses all over the world. He left there as the CEO of retail. And now he's at Edward Jones, wearing the Edward Jones t-shirt, which already is an innovation for Edward Jones. And
hey, look, the technologists can't be the only ones wearing the cool stuff.
There you go. There you go. And he is bringing his high energy, his innovative thinking to innovations around wealth management. So look out for what you're going to see from Edward Jones. Next to him is Max Nierkirchen. Max, there's a definition of intelligence, which is, can you hold two opposing thoughts in your mind at the same time? I've seen Max hold 3, 4, 5 opposing thoughts in his mind, and that's just when he's warming up. So Max is a brilliant guy, PhD. He's at JP Morgan. He's currently running the payments and commerce business. He's the global head of that business. Super interesting business. You can imagine how fast technology is driving the changes in payments. And he's got the world to think about, as well as the smallest companies that JPMC works with, as well as the biggest companies on payments. And before that, he ran merchant services. So I'm very excited to hear what Max is going to say. And last but not least, Julie Dillman. Julie is an amazing innovator, which is even more amazing because she's a 30-year veteran of insurance, which may not be the fastest moving industry, but she can take an organization and help them think very differently and move incredibly quickly. Despite that legacy, Julie is the chief digital officer at Chubb. She's driving incredible transformations there. Before that, she ran tech and ops, so she's kind of seen running the back, now driving the front, and making real changes to the experience for Chubb's customers and employees using digital. So a terrific panel. I'm really excited to hear from all of you. Let me start with an opening question, maybe just get some context from all of you about what you're doing. Maybe just, and I'll start with you, Luke, if you don't mind. Tell us a little bit about the journey that you're on, what you're trying to accomplish, and a little bit about the role of technology and maybe some of the challenges that you're working through. So I'll start with you, Luke.
Yeah, sure, absolutely, and thanks for that intro. So look, at Goldman, we're doing I think a couple things, or maybe more than a couple of things, can say at the same time. So we're really making a big push to grow our third-party capital base. So historically, our alternatives business was quite heavily driven off the Goldman balance sheet, and there's been a huge push to really bring in third-party capital and really scale that fund business. And that has a couple of interesting implications. So implication one, obviously, we have significantly larger number of LPs and clients that we're servicing than we have historically, and so there's a whole associated set of fund operations and fund capabilities that needs to scale very materially. But we're also significantly growing the capital base, which means that we're investing at a much larger scale, which means we need to, deploy significantly more capital. In some cases, we're writing larger checks, but in many cases, it just means that we're turning the sort of wheels of commerce faster. We need to source at larger scale, we need to diligence more effectively, and we need to execute more effectively. And so that set of activities is really where I've been focused for the last year or so, and partnering with Gary and the team at Uncork, which is, how do we look at that sort of manufacturing process, if you will, of starting with sourcing and identification of opportunity, progressing through to sort of diligence and shaping and underwriting, and then through to execution, deployment, and portfolio management of the deal. And how do you do that across 1,000+ professionals globally across private equity, private credit, real estate, et cetera. So there's a ton of domain complexity, there's a ton of scale, and because we're underwriting, we're underwriting funds that we're investing, there's a fiduciary dimension to all of this decision making that runs through everything. So it's a super interesting journey, but it's really a very interesting time to be digitizing what historically has not been a digitized business or a fully digitized business, and really doing that at scale.
Terrific. David.
So we have a bit of a different business at Edward Jones. We have 19,000 advisors that happen to sit in 15,552 individual branches, which means we have more people showing up in more locations than Starbucks does in the country. And to say in our industry, you're hearing a lot of our peers talk about this idea of high touch and high tech. Well, at Edward Jones, we don't believe that. We believe that our model is high touch, but it's all about high trust. And in the last few years, in particular the last year in wealth management, I'd say people who may have thought that they can use technology to ultimately drive their outcomes and didn't need advice are starting to realize they need advice. I think we all are realizing that in this environment. But the reality is technology is becoming such a portion of empowering good advice in whatever channel you use, whether you're using a self-directed or whether you are relying on a traditional advisor. So our mission at Edward Jones is how do we empower the largest field force in wealth management in the country and maybe the world, to be able to bring better insight, better real-time data, better content to more clients around. And for us, it's been 100 years this month, actually, of bringing Wall Street to Main Street. How does technology not become seen as an us versus them, but embedded into the experience? So we have not been the forefront leaders in technology. And so it's funny when I hear people say, we are in a business, it's a technology business that happens to do wealth management. Or when I used to work at Citi, we're a technology business with a banking license. I reject that. I say every business today is a technology company. My dad's a dentist. He has a technology arm to his practice today and how he runs it. We all need to think of how we use technology differently, but how do you empower 19,000 people who are far from PhDs or engineers to do so? Well, you need smart partners that can actually drive that revolution to bring it forward. And we are a really exciting case of how you can do that at a scale unlike any other. So we are very excited about this journey, but in my mind, it's about how you make technology as an empowerment in anyone, whether they're an engineer or right out of college as a wealth manager.
Great. Max.
So when you ask a random person on the street, what does a bank do? They will probably say they lend money, they provide advice, and they process payments. And the payments part is very, very important. We serve companies of all sizes, help them pay their employees, help them pay their suppliers, but also shaping their customer experience. If any of you checks out, buys something online, the experience there is also shaped by the payments experience. So it is, for our clients, a very, very critical product. And fortunately, we have a great business there. We process $10 trillion every day. We do this at 99.9999% precision because you need to, if you do that much, be very precise and reliable. We do 100 countries, 100 currencies, so it's really a scale business. However, the world of payments, and Alan said it at the beginning, is also changing very fast. There's a lot of innovation happening, new payment methods, new countries, new services, new ways to integrate. And technology is really at the center of all of this. You cannot do that without technology. There's no manual processes that can handle this. There's, really a big focus on technology that is driving that. And this is why all the journeys that Gary talked about in the opening is also so central to our business.
Great. Julie, last but not least.
So we're risk takers at Chubb. That's what we do for a living, and we like to think of ourselves as, probably the best managers of risk. When we think about where we need to go on our journey, it's much more about how we become both an underwriting and an engineering company. And I'll talk a little bit about what that means. We don't think about ourselves becoming a technology company, to David's point. We think about taking who we are, the best risk management capabilities, and how we infuse engineering into everything. And so our journey is more about how we continue to create value, margin, superior growth. And the messaging behind that is it changes the way we work internally. And we think about that in terms of the new skill sets we need to be able to underwrite, the data we need to be able to underwrite. And really Gary's picture around the chasm between business and IT kind of hit the home run in terms of where we're trying to go. We look at it and say the business should operate like a software development company. And that means that our business leaders and our functions and the people that manage the business need to be better at using data. They need to be better at engineering, and they need to be better at actually understanding how software or other capabilities can empower them to make faster, better product or underwriting decisions. And when we think about it, even from a technology perspective, we talk internally about technology becoming a discipline, not a function. And we do not call technology IT anymore. We say, we're craftsmen at what we do. Your craft lives in the business, and you're a technologist, or you're an engineer of processes, and that's sort of the language we're using as we're on our journey.
Great. It's very interesting. You're all solving critical business problems. Some are about how do we get distributed people all around to use tools in new ways. David, you, and there's also you're kind of unlocking new capabilities, right, to meet market needs. In all of that, there is, and I'll pick up on the point you raised, Julie, which I think is a really interesting one. There are few people that kind of understand exactly where you're trying to get to from a business point of view, and also what it's going to take from a technology point of view. So as you pointed out, Julie, the picture that Gary had of the chasm and the role in this new world that both the business and IT need to play. Maybe you could each talk a little bit about that and your role as leaders. How do you bring those two sides together? How do you think about bridging the gap? Maybe if you don't mind, Max, we'll start with you and then go down.
Yes, so I love the picture of the chasm that is there, but in reality, I think we all have probably done a lot of work to overcome this. When you think about the next generation of modern business leaders, including in banks, it's not that here's the business and here's the tech department, but they have become more or less one. And when there's a problem, and I get a call from our boss, Jamie Dimon, he says, what's going on? It's not a good answer if I say, let me bring the head of tech on, but he expects that I know what's going on and that I'm really in the details, given the importance of technology. And it's not only the importance for the day-to-day business, it's also for any investment decisions, because so much of the expense, but also of the customer experience that you're driving depends on the decisions you're making around technology. So I think it is absolutely a responsibility of the business leaders to be very versed and familiar with the technology they use.
Great. David, how about for you? How are you finding the integration between technology and the business?
Well, I thought that the picture you drew there, Gary, was really good, except there was one problem with it, which is instead of them being on opposite gulfs and looking at each other, you had to have them pointing their fingers at each other, which would be how I get used to sort of business and technology working together. I'll give you a case. A couple of weeks ago, bond markets went a little crazy. I think we all saw it. And let's say no one in the world was really expecting to see the run on markets and, frankly, the shift of money into cash and CDs that happened. And many firms faced a struggle and system latency issues, and immediately you get a phone call from our head of services like, what the, choose to omit a word he used here, is going on here? I called my product head, I called my technology head, I said, what's going on here? And immediately it's, oh, the technology isn't working, the systems aren't down. Oh, well, you never told me we'd have a latency situation that needed it like this. And you sit there and you're sitting there and everyone's just pointing the guys, I like that. What's the architecture? How do we think together? How do we solve a business problem? One of my financial advisors sitting in a branch in the middle of wherever there be doesn't care about who figured out the model, who designed the code, who set the requirements. Those are all words that mean nothing to them. The system has to work. It has to adapt. It has to be ready to be resilient for a changing world. That doesn't happen anymore, where you have people sitting on opposite sides throwing papers back and forth. So I think the idea of bringing it together, a new version of architecture, that's the only way business is going to go forward today. Technology is embedded to every single aspect of what we do. And I like that you said it's invisible. In some ways, it's beautiful when it's invisible in that way, and it can be empowered. But when it isn't, that's when we have those meetings and the failures and the finger pointing. And we all know that's not how we want to run our businesses going forward.
Right. Luke, how about for you? Goldman's got such a great history of business people moving into IT people moving into business. You've got certain groups like quants where really the business and IT is one. Is it very different, or is there still a gap there in terms of where you're trying to go? And how do you think about a platform in the context of that and moving things in a more integrated way?
Yeah, sure. A couple comments on that. I mean, I definitely would underscore the comments on, breaking down that divide between, the expression of the business problem and its kind of realization in technology and in a platform. I definitely think that is a shared responsibility. I think it's a responsibility of the business leaders, the P&L leaders, but it's also a responsibility of the technology leaders, because when I've seen it work best, and when it works, it's really pretty spectacular, but it doesn't work very often. Depressingly, as you look across, a lot of these large organizations that I've worked with, it doesn't work as often as it should. But when it works, what you have is the business and technology finding a middle ground on a language that works for both of them. And, I know Gary's smiling because, Uncork should obviously be that language, obviously. But that shared language is something where the business is expressing a set of capabilities that are meaningful to their strategy and which, if were realized, would be impactful. And technology is playing those things back in the same words and with the same shared understanding, so that when that gets turned into a roadmap and instead of execution, it doesn't suddenly become mysterious and opaque, right? So to use the classic, building a house, cliche, the owner is working with the architect to realize a vision, but when the general contractor comes and tells them, how they're doing in the bathroom, it's not all gobbledygook. It's like, yeah, we're putting in a mirror and a thing, and it's stuff that you understand, right? So coming together around a shared language is just super important. And I think things like Agile and these kinds of methodologies that we've seen evolving, they've all been kind of imperfect ways to sort of bridge that gap. But I think the takeaway for business and technology leaders is, are we really speaking the same language, or are we speaking past each other? I think that's just super important. There's a related concept which I've really been digging into, in the work we've been doing in Goldman and alternatives for the last year or two. As we think about how do we take an existing franchise and really 10x it, right? And 10xing is always interesting because it's kind of a break with the past. Most businesses, you can't 10x them just by running 10x faster. Something has to be kind of structurally different. And I think that gets into this idea of, what is the digital operating model? How do you design the operating model of the business to be enabled by technology. Not technology as an afterthought, like, hey, we have a process and we move the paper stack from here to here, and maybe the computer could move the paper stack, we could have a robot move the paper, whatever. It's like you need to fundamentally design these processes to be technology enabled, and that's, again, that needs to be a co-design by the business that understands the strategy and the operations, and the technology partners that understand how to make that happen.
So let me pick up on that point. You've all talked about bringing technology and business together and made a lot of progress. That is easier to do in good times than tough times. And who knows what the next few years will look like, but it's certainly very possible that you all will need to make choices. So maybe you could talk a little bit about how are you going to approach that? How are you going to prioritize? And how do you ideally keep that partnership, maybe even make it stronger, because making trade-offs means understanding what does it take to build something? What is it, how much impact can we get sooner? What are the trade-offs that we want to make? So, David, maybe start with you. How do you think about that and over the next 6, 12, 18 months to drive prioritization?
Yeah, so look, I'm going to use an IT Y word. I mean, we need the flexibility and you need that adaptability. We just don't know. I mean, yesterday we were going through our initial budgets and the world was over and everything was down. And this morning, suddenly it's great again and spend some money and no wonder for. And I think we're going to be in for a roller coaster. We've seen these before. And so one of the most important lessons you learn as a business leader is the hardest word in the English language only has 2 letters, and it starts with N and it ends with O. And you've got to learn the skill of how to say no, but do it in a way that doesn't, have everyone fleeing and running to, the exit doors. But it's important to prioritize. And I think that's an area where sometimes technology will rely on the business to make that call, when candidly, there's so much value when a technologist can come in and say, hey, you know something, there's a way we can drive forward, and here's how I look at it, a business situation, and we can work it through together that gets you to smarter solutions. And again, to the previous question, when that becomes a role that's separated, you design the strategy and decide, and I'll get it done, it leads to suboptimal worlds. We're in for, I think, a few years likely now of a required adaptability that is going to need smarter solutions than quote-unquote P&L business leaders will know how to do on their own. And don't get me wrong, I recognize in my role, I have the accountability to make that decision at the end of the day, and I'll live and die by it. But we're in a world where I think that opportunity to have partnership between business and technology to think through how to stage gate activities, how to build, how to create flexibility to be able to turbocharge on a day like today, but also be able to modulate on a day like yesterday and work through that in a good way. That, to me, will define the tech teams and business teams that work together to create the best opportunities for the future.
Julie, how about for you? And you've seen it, right? You've run tech and ops. You're now kind of seeing the broader view across Chubb, and you understand the business needs. How are you going to approach the prioritization should it be needed?
Yeah, I think, look, a couple of things. One, technologists have the obligation as leaders to actually align to the business problems that we're trying to solve. So, the messaging around that is very, very specific at Chubb. Here's the objective. We're going to create margin. We're going to do it through digitization. We're going to fundamentally change the organization and how we work to do that. And everything aligns back to those core goals. I think the other thing I would say, in a bit of a pivot around hard times and good times, when you're a profitable, growing, revered franchise, and you walk in and you say to a global organization, as our CEO did, if we don't stand still, and this is the future of Chubb, it's much harder to change on the back of that than when you have a burning issue or a burning platform. So I think the idea that you align and you check back frequently in terms of, did we accomplish actually the mission or the objective that we're trying to achieve, as opposed, did we put a bunch of software in market, or did we put a bunch of analytic products in market and the business hasn't changed? What's the so what? Or to the point that, I think the whole group has made, we've organized in small multidisciplinary teams and we count story points. So, is the outcome any different?
Right.
That's the true essence. And so I think as you come closer together and everyone is accountable for those measurements and those so what's, those outcomes, you start seeing the value.
Yeah. Max, how about for you? You're in a business that really is, it's all technology. You win or lose by tiny amounts of basis points. You've got presumably a lot of things you need to fund from a tech debt perspective. I don't think you're running completely on Uncork yet. Gary will get you there. Yet you still need to innovate. You need to innovate and have new capabilities. So how do you think about making some of those trade-offs? Because you can't stand still either.
Yes, we have also changed the way we operate around these questions. And to be honest, in payments, we face tremendous competition. It's a very innovative field. It's traditional banks, but it's also a lot of fintech companies that are competing there. And while I don't love competition, looking back at the last 10 years, that has really raised the game for us. And in the following ways. Number one, we brought in different leaders. So the leaders who run our businesses are much more tech savvy than they used to be, because it's such an important part of the business that you have almost, in many cases, commercial engineers running the business than the other way around. Very important change. Second, organizationally, it used to be in large banks, I'm sure Dave has seen it too, here's the business, they throw something over the fence, tech does something, and then there's the finger pointing and all of this. We have in many of our businesses put the engineers and the business people together in one org. So there's no more excuses and he said, she said, but everyone is together. That's the second important change. Probably the third one is we work a lot more with third parties, like Uncork and many others, to basically deliver that roadmap, because you just can't do it all in-house, you can't do it all on your own. You need to benefit from the experience that folks have built in the market. And that is also much more of an open architecture that can be leveraged and is important.
Right. Luke, at Goldman, is there a special sauce? Is there an AI that prioritizes for you? How do you make some of these decisions?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think it comes back to the same concept we were talking about, right? Which is like, you need to be speaking the same language so that you can prioritize. And I think there's kind of an anti-pattern, and let's say that this doesn't happen at Goldman for the sake of argument. The anti-pattern is, you come bottoms up with a laundry list of like technology stuff, right? And then you sort of passively aggressively push it across the desk to the business guy and say, I don't know, like, what do you want me not to do? Do you not want security? That's a dynamic that exists a lot, and it's pretty unhelpful. And unfortunately, the business people respond also passive-aggressively by saying, well, I'm just cutting your head count and you figure it out. So that's kind of and then the world goes round, right? So if that can be much more of a force rank list where everyone understands that set of trade-offs, like there's some great frameworks out there of like, how do you trade off, paying down tech debt versus feature creation versus risk mitigation, just Google them, there's a bunch of them. But having some way of kind of bucketing these things in a business-friendly way to say, these are the trade-offs and I understand the trade-offs. Yeah. I think that's just like super critical. And I think the difference between organizations that can do that, especially under times of duress like we are now, you have a huge opportunity to differentiate, because when, rising tide, all boats, whatever, right? And we've seen that over the last, really decade, I would say, is like everyone can run into spaces, there's lots of money, money's free. It's hard to tell who's really differentiated. When you really pull back and you have more austerity, the marginal dollar really matters, right? And so then the ability to execute with precision, it's the same like risk management, like Goldman obviously is the consummate risk manager after Chubb. But the ability to risk manage is you understand your exposure and you understand the linkage between things. And so I think in technology, it's the same thing. It's like, what are we trading off? And can we trade off with precision? Or do we just cut 13% of our headcount, for example?
Yeah, great. Okay, so just to wrap up, I'll give you each one last word. If you had to give one either mantra or short piece of advice to the audience in terms of how to navigate innovation, which is our topic, what would that be? I'll start with you, Julie.
I think I'll say two things. Honor the history and then run over it.
Awesome. Love it, love it. Max, you can add to that or pass. It's a high bar.
I have a slightly longer answer. I think from my experience, it's very important to get the horizons for investment and innovation right. Because you can't only think about the great things that come in 10 years, because people and whoever funds that runs out of patience. But you also can't just double in the tactical stuff for tomorrow. So to really think about what do you do for changing the world, what do you do for meaningful change, and what do you do to fix and improve incrementally is very, very important.
Great. David.
I remember Gary and I were sitting in a room probably about, I don't know, 10 years ago or so, and Gary has this incredible system he's built like overnight. I don't know, it's just an incredible thing. He shows it to us at Citi. We're looking at it like, oh my God, like that is just incredible. And then, of course, everyone looks around and says, oh, but, we've got another business to run here and do this. And, I had a moment where I thought I could have spoke up, and we may have changed the world in a little different way there, and I didn't. And I missed an opportunity, I feel. I think the biggest challenge in innovation sometimes is it's easy to just keep doing things when things are good. And in a tough time, it's easy to be the person who just takes the contrary point and goes with a safe way. When it comes to innovation, you got the conviction, speak up.
Awesome. Luke, final advice.
Yeah, look, I think innovation comes from people, right? So people do the innovating. So I think culture and talent and ways of working are just super important. And so I think if leaders are focusing on creating environments where really good people want to work and clearing obstacles, clearing frustration, clearing those pain points, you start to get a really great group of people that come together, and that is a prerequisite for innovation, I think.
Awesome. Terrific. Well, thank you, panelists.